everybody. Welcome to the March edition of Frequency Freaks. This is going to be the most exciting workshop that I've ever been a part of. And so grateful to be a part of it and to have been able to put it together for you, the viewers, and to have learned so much from building it. This month's focus is on what I'm calling sequencer choice architecture. So basically, it's all about sequencers, hardware and software, and what's out there and how to choose. So obviously, in the modern sequencer landscape, or in terms of what's available out there, it's a dizzying amount of gear. And I know I've had difficulty in the past figuring out which one to buy, both in terms of the amount of money that I have, but also the amount of time I'm willing to spend learning. So what we're doing today is basically trying to help mitigate that and to help the viewers achieve your goals and understand what's available in the market and how those options differ. So the primary discussion will be to outline some of the various options available for musical sequencing across hardware and software. And by knowing what's out there, help you, the viewers, in deciding on sequencers that are right for your creative goals. Main way that we're going to achieve this is through product demos and interviews with some of my favorite sequencer and synthesizer manufacturers in the business today, including Erica Synths, 512 Modular, and a brand new company that I'm really excited to talk to you about and to talk with them about is Anti-Kulture on specific units that they produce. And we're also going to have some great demos performed by Bachelard, also known as Heidi Chan in our community. She's going to do a demo on the Ableton Live stock software sequencer. We have David Castellani from Anti-Kulture, who's going to be doing a demo on his Precision Disruptor generative melodic sequencer Eurorack module. We have Jim Coker from 512 Modular doing an overview of his vector sequencer. We also have Trovarsi showing us some sequencing techniques, some patching techniques with the vector. We have Tulpa Dusha, who is here showing us the Nerdseq tracker sequencer. Got myself, I'm going to be doing a demo of the Deluge sequencer. And we have finally Kodek from Erica Synths, who's going to be doing a demo of the Perkons. And we also have the founder and visionary at Erica Synths, Girts Ozolins, who's going to be joining us here today. So, you know, another reason to just describe why today matters is what we're doing is providing a time-stamped review of the main criteria that one might consider before acquiring a sequencer. We're going to give demos, as I said, of the diverse options available. And we also aim to help synth manufacturers to get the word out on some of the great equipment that they're building, and to give you, the viewers, an opportunity to learn a bit more, to see if these are right for you. Today, as I mentioned a little bit, but I'll go into a little more detail today, we're featuring a panel with some of the most esteemed members of the modular synth and synthesizer community that I know of. I'm extremely honored to be here with these people. First and foremost, we have Trovarsi, who's here from California. She's known for, there she is, hey Trovarsi. And she's known for her music, her fantastic, mainly dance music that is under her name Trovarsi, and also SoCal Synth Society, which is a YouTube channel that Frequency Freaks is partnering up with today and more in the future on this question of sequencer choice architecture. She's also one of the founders of the Sound Lab. So thanks very much, Trovarsi, for joining us.
Thanks, Michael. It's great to be here.
And next, we have David Castellani, who is one of the founders of Anti-Kulture Electronics. David Castellani is a techno producer and modular synthesist with a main focus on peak time, dance floor-driven tracks. David's sound, fueled by an array of analog hardware, showcases the intricate aspects of modern music production, while staying true to the fundamentals that inspire you to let loose on a dark warehouse floor. So, David, thanks so much for joining us. He is also going to be showing us and talking a bit about his Precision Disruptor sequencer today that I can't wait to see more about. So thanks a lot for joining us, David.
Thank you, Michael.
Next, we have Jim Coker, who, if you are not aware, is the brain or the main brain behind 512 Modular and the vector sequencer that any of you who are watching that have touched a Eurorack modular for any period of time know his vector, and you respect his vector. Or if you don't, then you should, because this thing is monstrous. So thank you very much for joining us, Jim.
Thanks for having me on.
Pleasure to have you. Jim Coker, just to go a little bit more into what he does, he's a software developer, product designer, visual artist, and musician living in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Coker got his start in electronic music at Stanford's CCRMA Computer Music Group. This sparked a lifelong obsession with electronic and experimental music, eventually leading to the release of the numerology sequencing software. So not only has he built a industry-leading hardware sequencer, but he also has numerology, and that would be great to hear him maybe chat with us a little bit about that too. Coker released in 2018 the vector sequencer in the 3U Eurorack format. Next, we have myself. My name's, I go by Octavian, first name Michael. I've been a member of Frequency Freaks ever since 2017. I also make some music under Octavian Sound, and you can find me on Instagram under @OctavianSound. I mainly put these workshops together, try to get like minds together to talk about electronic music making, and I also make a lot of documentation to try to help people with learning different pieces of gear. So I make what some people call cheat sheets, but I like to call parameter grids, just to make myself sound more important. But they are basically 1 to a few page documents that help you navigate different modules. The first one I did was on the disting by Expert Sleepers, and actually my first time working with Erica Synths that I was honored to be able to do for them was the manual for their drum sequencer module. So I worked initially with Kodek on that, and then with Girts as well. And so if you ever read the manual, as fun as that is, for the drum sequencer, then you'll be reading some of my words. Next, we have Scott Lepore, who is a partner in crime of mine at Frequency Freaks. And Scott is an entrepreneur and artist living and working in Toronto. With a formal background in improvised jazz, the primary focus of his artistic work over 40 years has been the intersection of analog and digital electronic instruments and contemporaneous music. His opus has taken the forms of expressionistic drone, structured neoclassical, and jazz rock fusion. Scott is the managing director of an IT services firm in Toronto and an active member of the Toronto amateur electronic music community. And thank you very much, Scott, for joining us. Pleasure to have you.
Thanks.
Next, all the way from Amsterdam. So I should say, this panel is going to span 5 time zones. So we are no longer just a Canadian synthesizer community. We are global. This is Frequency Freaks 2.0. And I'm really glad to be inaugurating that with all these great friends. So the next person I want to talk about is Tulpa Dusha. Her first name's Anna, but her artistic name and how you should know her is Tulpa Dusha. She is the founder of Modular Moon which is a modular synthesis school in Amsterdam, and it now has chapters, I think, in Japan and what other places does Modular Moon exist?
Mexico is second active location, and also Japan, Tokyo, mainly as workshops, one-on-one workshops, and also Berlin. But this location is moved a little bit at the moment because Konstantin moved to a different living space. But we still relate him to Berlin because that's his major work place and major living spot. So yeah, this is also one-on-one workshops. So major active locations is actually Amsterdam and Mexico City. Also, we recently launched one at Moscow, Russia, with the Bukla artist from there. But it was not activated fully due to COVID problems that was, happening all over the world. So, but the work was going on. So at the moment, I would say like full power workings are, of course, in Amsterdam and Mexico. That's the major two locations, and smaller one formats.
Amazing. Well, you also have a book out, I know, and I have it on my shelf. It's beautiful, not only in the way it's written, but also the visuals that you put out with your collaborator, Pete Johnston. Fantastic book. Your music is what drew me to you at first. I think before I knew anything about Modular Moon, I just found you as an artist on online.
Awesome.
Yeah. And so it's a real pleasure to have you on. I know you're also part of Sound Objects, and we can talk a little bit more about that going forward. So the last guest that I want to introduce is someone who's been a whose creative output and business acumen I don't know has any parallel in sequencers and synthesizers in general. This is the founder and visionary creator of Erica Synths, Girts Ozolins, and he is here with us today just a few days after his birthday. Happy birthday, Girts, to talk to us about a new drum sequencer that they have called Perkons.
Hey.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for joining us, Girts. So I promise I'll open this up for everybody very soon, but I just want to get through a couple other items. So from today, Saturday, March 12th until March 31st, 2022, we have for Frequency Freaks and SoCal Synth Society members, we're going to be giving you access to 15% off of Erica Synth's online store. Now, this is our gift to you, our loyal members, for joining us in this workshop and for supporting us all along. So please make use of that promo code and get yourself some incredible Erica Synths gear for one of a lifetime discount. I mean, you don't get these kinds of discounts very often for gear that is already of such high quality. I'm happy to pay full price for this equipment, but certainly if I'm getting a discount like that, I'm gonna take notice and I'm gonna take advantage of it.
This was not a paid promotion, so.
No, but it could be. Maybe we'll talk about that later. But right now it's not. So like I say, the demos that we're going to have, we'll be listening first of all to Bachelard, and she'll be doing a demo now of the Ableton session and arrangement view.
Okay. And before we jump over, I'd say 512 will be able to offer the same discount. I just don't have the coupon code ready yet.
Excellent. Okay, and that's something I didn't even know prior to filming this. So it's a developing story here. There's breaking news all the time. And
I should also get maybe I should put the one book on the on the table.
But yeah, so what we're going to do now is just show the demo, the first demo with Bachelard, who's been a longtime member of our community, on the Ableton software sequencer, which is the stock session and arrangement view sequencer.
Hi everyone, this is Heidi recording from Toronto, and today I am giving a little demo of the sequencing capabilities of Ableton Live. As some of you might know, Ableton Live offers two kinds of workflows for arranging and working with musical material, and today I'm going to talk about them more in the context of and in relation to modular sequencing, which is the theme of Frequency Freaks this month. Ableton Live is a digital audio workstation, and it offers two workflows, which is kind of unique in the world of DAWs, especially when Ableton Live first came on the scene. And so the first workflow, or the first view that Ableton offers, is what you're seeing right now, which is the familiar kind of left to right linear timeline for arranging MIDI and audio information, MIDI and audio tracks. And then if you press, if you flip the page on the app, you get the second workflow, which is a grid-like interface for triggering individual blocks of information, which Ableton calls clips, right? So clips could be a short block of MIDI notes, or it could be a single hit audio sample or a longer audio loop, but all of them are considered clips when we are working in this session view, what's called session view. And so I'm going to go through a little bit of the capabilities of both of these arrangement, or I guess in our discussion, sequencing environments. So getting right into the sequencing capabilities on Ableton Live, let's start with the arrangement view, because I think that's a more familiar environment, and we can quickly go through that before we go into the more interesting session view. But the arrangement view, I think in terms of sequencing capabilities, we can look at from a couple of viewpoints. And the first is that it allows us to work with large chunks of information, and whether that is an audio loop or a MIDI clip. As you can see here, I have a project with both a number of MIDI and audio clips. And so in a linear timeline like this, it's quite easy to have an overall sense of the structure of the piece. It's very easy to take things in and out of a song without even having to go to that point and playing it back. You have a big picture of the sequence. At the same time, you can access within each clip, especially for MIDI clips, you can access each individual clip and work with it as its own chunk that doesn't affect, copies of it, for example. So in that sense, the arrangement view is quite optimal in terms of a workflow where you're focused on, song structure, and you have a vision of, all the parts and where they fit together. It's very easy to move things around. It's very easy to, move this end section to the front of the song. And it's very easy to say, oh, I want to, mute these 8 bars or 16 bars. And so it's really, really easy to do that and still have an overall idea of where things are in that particular point in a piece. Switching over to the session view is a fairly different way of working, and in a way it's a little bit similar to some desktop sampler units like phrase samplers like the Roland SP404, or even the MPC workstations, where you have a grid-like interface with pads, and you can assign single shot samples or a loop of something onto each pad, and you can trigger it, you can set it to loop, and then you can access another sound from another pad or another slot. and then work with individual elements that way. And that's what the session view in Ableton Live offers. So as you can see, I have peppered a number of loops and one-shots all over this grid. And one of the things that the session view can do, a very powerful thing for working with song structure, is that you can trigger an entire row of clips at the same time. So quickly demonstrate, for example, if I press on any of these slots here called a scene, I can trigger the entire row of clips. So in my case, I only have one audio clip on this row. So when I press this, it's only going to play that clip, right? Okay, so I've got this loop playing, and this particular clip is set to loop. So as long as it's played, it's triggered, it's going to loop indefinitely. And I've set it up so that the next row adds one other clip to it. So for that, you know, this is like my intro, and I'm going to add something else. Just riff over that initial loop. And the third scene has a few more clips in it, and I can trigger all of those at the same time as well, and on time at the beginning of the beat. And I'll just trigger one more scene where is, you know, kind of a more of a breakdown. So I'm taking away things at this point. And so in this way, the session view is really great for experimenting with arrangements, is really great for experimenting with individual loops. You know, you can play a whole loop for an hour, get a feel for it before you commit anything to an arrangement. And I think also visually, it helps you get out of that linear concept of, you know, how a song should proceed and how it should build. It kind of frees you from that. So the session view is really, really powerful. You can also record directly onto a slot. If you arm any of the tracks, any of the empty clips could be recorded into. So again, it's kind of similar to a phrase sampler, a desktop phrase sampler like an SB404. You can just record into a slot and then play it back. So you can use the session view as a phrase sampler, comparing to some of the modular tools like the 1010 Bitbox, right? So in that way, the session view offers a little bit more of a modular workflow, or at least you can modularize the musical elements that you're using in a song. And, you know, reflecting on this idea of different ways of sequencing, you know, in a DAW or on a modular, I would say that some of the things that I miss working in a DAW is really simple things and utilities in a modular system that you don't really think about. Access to like logic functions and sequential switching and something like clock division and multiplication. Like, it works very differently in a DAW than in a modular system. You know, I don't think I ever thought about clock division or clock multiplication in the same way until I started playing a modular synth. Same with, you know, logic and sequential switches, right? Because it's not built into a DAW sequencing environment. And another really simple tool in a modular system, but a really, really big one is the idea of the VCA, right? What you can control one thing with another thing. You know, most of us use VCA as something to open up a sound source, right? With, you know, typically an oscillator and controlled by an envelope. But in a modular system, we can easily replace an envelope with an LFO or like a wavetable something, or even a noise source, right? We can easily turn a very simple, you know, oscillator controlled by a ADSR into audio rate amplitude modulation, into something super noisy, into all kinds of things. And, that is something that I think, and all the tools available in Ableton Live, things like that, utilities, modular utilities like that in a modular, I think allows it to, I think it allows us to create different musical results because of the tools that we have. And so I guess in conclusion, this was a pretty great exercise for me to reflect on some of the differences and similarities between modular sequencing and DAW sequencing.
Okay, great. Now we have our second demo that's going to be by David Castellani of Anti-Kulture. Thanks so much, David, for contributing this demo. We're going to be hearing his Eurorack generative melodic sequencer, the Precision Disruptor, which is the first module out of his company, Anti-Kulture. Can't wait to show you what he has in store for you. Let's have a watch.
Welcome to the Precision Disruptor by Anti-Kulture, a generative random-based sequencer that focuses on creativity, performance, and speed. The main concept behind the Precision Disruptor is to avoid wasting precious creative flow by using targeted randomization and having intuitive control over your ideas. Here's how it works. The 16-step sequencer at the top can be randomly populated using the sliders and mini keyboard below. Use the gate slider to start generating gates. The higher you raise the slider, the more complex the rhythm will be. Notice the white buttons in the note and octave section. These are the root note and root octave for the sequence. They can be easily changed by holding a different note or octave button. If you wish to add melodic variation, simply select the additional notes and octaves that you wish to include in your sequence. Now, raising the octave and note sliders will start introducing the additional melodic content that you've selected. Let's add a snare for some color. For additional depth, use the accent output to ping VCAs, filters, or whatever else you desire. Raise the accent slider to your liking and add further complexity to your sequence. Finally, add 303 style portamento to your sequence by raising the slide. The Precision Disruptor does everything in real time, offering direct tactile control over the creation of your sequences. It's immediate, it's playable, and allows you to focus on the ideas. When you found a combination that's to your taste, try using the melody and groove disrupt buttons to randomly generate a new sequence, while still using your pre-selected parameters. The melody disrupt button will regenerate the melodic content, while the groove disrupt button will shuffle the gates, accents, and slides. Keep disrupting the sequence until you're satisfied. At any point, you can manually edit the sequence on a per-step basis by adding or removing gates, accents, and slides. Holding a gate will allow you to change the note and octave. To alter the last step of a sequence, simply hold the last button and choose the gate you wish the sequence to repeat on. This is great for creating polyrhythms. The bottom row of the sequencer is for storing and recalling 16 preset patterns. Copy and paste patterns with ease. Switch over to the next preset pattern and disrupt some more. Easily chain preset patterns by holding the chain button and pressing the desired presets in order. Further features such as undo, preset recall, and in the menu, clock multiplication and division, clock sources, internal BPM, playback direction, swing, gate length, and of course, it's always more fun with external CV. Use the two CV inputs to have full control over the sliders, note and octave sections, as well as the disrupt buttons. The module is perfect for Acid 303 style sequencing, but you can do so much more. Acid sure is fun though.
Great. Okay. Now we're really on a roll here now. Let's keep it going. So now we have our third demo for you. This is another Eurorack module. This is a totally different take on sequencers, and just to show you, again, as part of our goal for this month's workshop, and showing you some of the different range of options that are available for you. We have Tulpa Dusha, who is going to show us a breakdown of the Eurorack tracker sequencer Nerdseq. Let's see what she's built for us today.
Hi guys, I know you're expecting a brief review of the Nerd sequencer right now. However, Michael and me, we decided to rephrase this session because the Nerd sequencer is a very deep machine, and to give it 5 minutes of time would not really bring much of the results. Yesterday, when recording the 5-minute session over the Nerd sequencer, I realized that 5 minutes is not enough to properly show and explain what exactly that is. So we're going to rephrase that. My apologies for this. Maybe you expected something at this point, but it is better to follow a strategy in that sense. A way longer session around Nerd sequencer and the entire setup on building a patch like this that is sounding right now is going to be presented to you on the next session of the Frequency Freaks. So that's the thing. Thank you for following up, and see you later.
Fantastic. Okay. I mean, yeah, tracker sequencers, the vertical approach to a tracker sequencer is just one of a kind. I'm really glad that we have that as a counterpoint here. Let's take a look at Trovarsi's demo and Jim's overview of the 512 vector sequencer. So what we'll do first is see Jim Coker's overview, and then Trovarsi's going to show us a patching technique.
Hello there, my name is Jim, and I'm going to be showing you the vector sequencer. The vector is a digital sequencer with an analog style control format based around 2 large OLED displays at the main 8 edit knobs. It is a Eurorack format module and has a selection of both analog and MIDI input and output. I'm going to start by starting the transport on a blank sequence. Now I have pitch and gate for this first part mapped to a simple patch on the top half of my modular. I've got an AJH mini mod oscillator running into an SEM filter and a pair of envelopes off the Quadra. To start notes playing from the sequence, I'm just going to push the encoders for the notes I want to play. And I can adjust the pitches by changing the encoders. I can also jump to the gate page and turn on other notes as I like. Or I can turn them off with the encoders. I can also use Shift and the button on the bottom right to clear out the pattern completely. Now all of the primary edit modes are in buttons along the top of the screen. We have pitches here, and on an alternate page, pitch glide, gate time, as well as groove amount, which is basically micro timing, velocity, step length and repeat. We have ratchets. We have chance operations, which are very interesting. I'll show those very quickly. So I'm going to program in a simple pattern. I'm going to go over the chance operations page, and I'm going to say on step 5, I'm going to pick an operation, and I'm going to pick ratchet. Dial over here to ratchet. There are probably about 30 different operations you can select, things to mute, unmute, skip, unskip, change the pitch, change the step length. Ratcheting is always a great little addition to add. I'm going to set ratchet as the operation and set the probability just past 50%, and then start the sequence again. Nice little extra randomization of my pattern. I can go a little further. I can say on step 4, which actually isn't playing anything, I'm going to set that to jump backwards with probability again around 50%. That's really going to mix things up a bit. Press this gray button here and use it to select some steps, and I'm going to choose up by an octave as my, actually we'll go with a fifth, 7 semitones. Again, set the probability around half, and I can clear out the selection by holding the shift key and pressing select. So what I've made with a very simple set of changes is I have 8 steps as my nominal sequence, but the actual sequence feel is much longer and variable because the chance operations allow me to have it be different pretty much every time I play. After chance ops, we have some modulation options. There are actually 2 internal modulation subsequencers for each part, and there are 8 parts on the vector. I can say I want to set one subsequencer to run with 4 steps at a rate of whole notes, and we're going to use transposition. We're going to turn that on, and I'm going to page over to the next step, and I'm going to have it say run for 1 bar normally, and for the next bar I'm going to go up 4 semitones and then up 5 semitones, and let's see how we like that. So that's pretty nice, and we're going to take this a little further. We're going to go to the second subsequencer. We're going to, right, this is the second subsequencer. I'm going to leave that at 8, go with 7 steps forward. Have this run at 16 notes. I'm going to go for octave and enable that, and then I'm going to use this to just do some unusual transpositions. We'll kind of create a on-the-fly bass line by transposing a few notes here and there down by 2 octaves. And then next we have on the sequence control page are our primary kind of sequence globals, the things that affect all the steps in the sequence. So we have the start and the length of the sequence we're playing, and like I said before, we can extend this out to 16, or if you reformat the part up to 32 or 64 steps. The direction, reset, which can be automatic or based on, say, every 3 beats or every 7 beats, or even using an external signal. Set that back for now. The sequence rate, sequence rate mode, and there are actually several different modes in here, including many that are completely different grids than normal musical divisions. Octave and semitone transpositions that you can set directly here, and you'll also notice they have little subscripts to indicate that they are being modulated by the subsequencers. We have presets. We have about 20 presets for 16-step parts. For longer parts, you get fewer presets, but you still get 6 presets for a 64-step part, and I think it's 12 for a 32-step part. I can easily make a copy of this pattern, and let's say I want to reset the pitches only. Hold down Shift and press pitch. Now I can program in some new pitches. So now I have 2 patterns. I can flip between them like this. If you want, you can actually set up a playlist function to flip between presets. And then something to note is the vector is actually a multi-part sequencer. You can have up to 8 parts. They can be assigned to all of the different outputs as you see fit. That's fully customizable. Parts can be monophonic sequences, which they are by default, but they can also be chord sequences. I believe part 6 set as a chord sequence. I don't have it plugged in, but you can do 4-note chords from a selection of built-in chords, but also custom chords. In fact, on this page, these chords are all using custom intervals. You can also have drum parts, and these can be assigned to MIDI outputs, which I'm using here. I'm using MIDI out 1 with a TRS cable directly into the Bitbox Micro, and I believe I have some drums mapped up, so I can program in my drums by using the encoder 9 to select which lane I'm editing, and then using the encoder to enter the values. And I can also push encoder 9 to select all steps in a row and then bring up a pattern like that. Now just a quick tour of all the outputs. We have 2 sets of pitch, gate, and velocity outputs on board. We have 4 more sets on the expander. We have USB A and B ports on board. Run, clock, and reset jacks. These are bidirectional. They can be used for inputs or outputs, to send sync or to receive sync. 2 modulation inputs, and on the modulation page, if I dial all the way over, you can use these inputs to affect a wide number of parameters, including being able to set the amount of modulation. And there are 2 sets of modulation, there are 2 modulation buses per part. We also have the 2 MIDI inputs here, 2 more MIDI outputs on the expander with DIN jacks, 2 DIN sync jacks with DIN connectors, and 8 triggers. And the first 6 of these are bi-directional, so you can send triggers out like I have patched in here, or you can send triggers in and use them to reset parts or to step parts manually. And also, if you look over the right, we have a launch pad. The launch pad mapping is primarily designed as a performance interface to give you quick high-level control over all 8 parts. And the first page of that is the session page. Along the top, you can select which part you're editing. So you can see as I press these over on the vector, the part label jumps around. The next row are record functions for each part, specifically turning record on and off. And now is probably a good time to mention there are several record modes, including step recording with through mode, so you can hear what you're doing as you step record, transpose, a straight up through mode, basically as a MIDI CV converter, real-time grid option with the ability to record quantized or unquantized. And then getting back to the launch pad, you can turn that record mode on and off very easily across all 8 parts in the second row. The next 3 rows are for mutes. The first row mutes individual parts, as you can see here on the part page, and then the next 2 rows are for polyphonic parts. Part 8, which is this set of 4 here, are for the drums. So I can mute part 1 and mute my drum parts individually. There's a scene mode, which allows you to build more complex arrangements across all 8 parts. And the next 2 rows on the launch pad allow you to access the first 16 scenes with 1 button press. The bottom row of these colorful buttons is something called the dashboard. And that allows you to edit some parameters across all 8 parts, 1 parameter at a time for all 8 parts, which is kind of an interesting performance option. On the launch pad, we also have a big preset screen, so you can easily queue up presets across multiple parts, keep track of where you are. A couple of built-in keyboard layouts so that you can use that in conjunction with the record modes to record patterns or play other instruments. And then lastly, we have a custom edit interface, so you can edit patterns on the fly, including being able to edit drum patterns. So that's a quick overview of the Vector sequencer. Thanks again for joining us.
My name is Trovarsi. I'm a techno and house producer, although I produce many other genres of music, and my setup is forever changing. And today I am using the Zone 96 as my mixer. I have sort of this hybrid setup situation happening. I have my Eurorack, and I also am using the Akai Force. And within this setup, the main sequencing that's happening is occurring with the Vector sequencer. One thing to note is with the Vector is that it has great connectivity, not only the obvious, CV gate, but also over MIDI, DIN, 5-pin, as well as USB. So in this case, I found that the the syncing options with the Akai Force, it was better at being the leader instead of the follower, and I found that the Vector is good either way. So in this case, I have the Force, and I'm doing that over USB-B. And another thing I would like to point out with the Vector is that I'm using the expansion. And if you notice, expansion is not next to the Vector, which I think is pretty cool, that as long as you have it on the same case, because the expansion is connected to the back of the Vector sequencer, you can put it as far away as long as you have the cable for it. So in this case, it was easy to be able to tuck it up in this corner out of my way so it can reach some of the modules that are up on the top case. I am using the expansion, and it has MIDI and DIN sync in and out, and so in this case I am taking advantage of the 5-pin MIDI output and using one of my parts right here named Poly, and it's sequencing my Poly Cinematic. Now the Poly Cinematic, you can obviously sequence it with CV and gate, but it is a 8-voice polyphony, excuse me. But so I'm like, why not take advantage of that and the chord option for setting apart and be able to sequence chords on just one part in the sequencer. So if I go to the page and you look here, and you can see the root note of this chord is G, and then down here, in this case, I'm just playing -5, meaning 5 semitones down, or if you're looking at a keyboard, in that case, 5 semitones moving down to the left. If we take a look at some of the other presets or patterns that I have here, you'll notice I have like a 4-note chord happening here. E is the root, the 11th, 3rd, and -5 semitones down, and so forth. But that's just really one of the great things that I really like about this sequencer, is that, hey, as long as I can take advantage of the MIDI and sequence a module getting polyphony, that's pretty awesome, and not have to have a huge patch going just to be able to play chords. And the other thing that I really wanted to point out, and I mentioned, or I may have mentioned, is that I want to be able to make my case as performable as possible. And that means, like, I'm now using the Zone. I can, write some sequences over there on the Akai Force if I like, or, what have you. But I also like my modular to be the same way, and so, you know, a lot of the way I choose a module is how you can perform with it, and that's one of the reasons why I really love using the vector sequencer. You have the keyboard here, so I could quickly sequence mute on mute notes, but I'm also using it to sequence another sequencer and be able to have control over those rhythms. So if you're listening to some of the weird wonky rhythms that I had with the top percussion, like, you'll see that this is flashing, this is a catalyst flow. It's basically a module that sends out CV, and I can control how much by this fader, and it attenuates, and I can save presets. So what I'm doing with this module and with the Euclidean circles is I am taking the trigger outs of the Euclidean circles and sequencing the disting, which has a drum kit, right? But the fun happens where I get clock. So now I'm clocking, and in this case, I made the exception for all of you. If you know, I only use red cables. I'm using this gray cable so you can see it. And I am sending clock out of one of the parts on the vector. So if I take a look at the vector here, you'll see that I have some notes here, but I'm not really so much focused on the notes in this case. I'm more concerned about the fact that the gates are on or off. The notes are just, they could be whatever. Because what I'm doing is taking the gate output of this part track and sequencing the clock. So if you look at how it's stepping, and you notice I only have 3 gates on out of this 8-step sequence, that's how the clock is moving on the Euclidean circles, right? You can see that. But now I'm doing that, and then I am also taking the mod input on the vector sequencer on this part, and I can now send external modulation into the vector. And by doing so, if I get to this page right here, and I go to the modulation, you can see that I am sequencing external input. It's receiving this source, it says source here, external input, and I'm sending some CV out of this catalyst flow module into the modulation input. I can now change what the input source, so in this case it's external, so it's receiving from external. In this case RCHT means ratcheting, and the amount, it can go up to 100. In this case I set it to 35, and that's just attenuating the amount of voltage that I'm receiving. So now if you watch as I move the fader and you watch the Euclidean circles, it starts to change, and now it's kind of skipping through ratcheting. So listen. So it's just another way to have fun and be able to control another parameter in your case and have fun playing with the sequence here. So if I go back to this sequence and I kind of give you a drum, just a kick drum, just to kind of anchor it. And now you see on this particular part, I have it doing something different. It's not ratcheting. In this case, I have it set on probability. And so that means, you know, that's based on how much the probability of how much CV I'm sending it is how much it's going to send the gate to the clock of the Euclidean circles. Yeah. So if you listen to that, it's barely sending any gates because of the probability. And now as I open it back up, it now continues on the sequence. So I have 8 steps, 8 gates. And again, if I look at the modulation lane and I continue to open this. So yeah, it's just thinking of really creative ways to kind of play with the rhythms, have a little more control over your case, and just have it a little bit more performable and fun. So let's. And here's just some other rhythms that I got out of using this specific patch.
Hey everybody, just wanted to give you a little extra preview of some Canadian content that we received from a community member named Scott Campbell, who is the leader of a manufacturer named OK200, whose, I believe, first module is the degree sequencer. And we can't wait to show you his demo and overview of that unit. It's really great, like I say, to have some Canadian representation on this workshop, and this sequencer is somewhat unique as well compared to all the others in ways that you'll see in a moment. So, hope you enjoy.
Hey everyone, my name is Scott. I'm a local enthusiast from Toronto here. Just wanted to demo the sequencer I've been working on. You'll have to excuse me, a little sick at the time of making this video, but it is what it is. Getting too in-depth with things, I thought I'd just start with, simple overview of what this thing does. Call it the degree. That's because it's all about scale degrees. You'll notice there's these 8 toggle switches on the side here. They're actually used for setting the scale of each one of these channels. So there's 4 channels, and all 4 channels are basically locked to this one scale that you set on the left side here. You'll notice that these are all like touch pads. Each channel has eight touch pads, plus 4 for octaves. And basically, when you touch these, they update this the 1 volt per octave signal on the output, and the module is kind of designed to send these 4 1 volt per octaves into 4 oscillators. So right now I have it patched up to a Dofer quad oscillator here. And then I'm just routing those oscillators into a VCA mixer type thing, and then into a filter. That's what you're hearing right now. Each channel has 2 extra outputs. There's like a bend output and a gate output. I'll just start with the gate. Gate is pretty straightforward. You every time you touch a pad, it's going to send a gate high signal, and every time you release it, it's a gate low signal. So I'll just send this into a little envelope here. There's actually a global gate output, which is sometimes better to use. It just, if any of the pads are touched, it's going to send a gate signal out. So. There's also a pitch bend component here. It's not like a. It acts like a pitch bend wheel, but it's not a wheel. It's like a steel piece of steel. It's called spring steel. It's like you can bend it a reasonable amount, and it will always kind of retain its shape. So there's a sensor on there. Lets you do pitch bends. So each channel has its own bender, I'm calling it. Each channel can also be put into a what I call quantizer mode. So this thing can work just as a traditional control voltage quantizer. So if I'm going to send it like something from a sequencer over here, right. So you just, add or remove degrees of the scale which you want to have that voltage mapped to, and you can, choose octaves. You can have it only in 1 octave or span all 4 octaves. Does give a nice effect when you start adding the other voices back in. Now, you can also record and play back the touch events you put into this thing. So if you just press record, you'll see this big 4x16 grid lights up, and that means it's recording anything you add in for a channel. it's all synced to a clock. It's a little hard to hear that clock right now because there's no, you know, kick drum going on at the moment or anything like that. But yeah, you can like speed and slow down things with the tempo knob. You can freeze things. You can also record the benders too. The bender movements are all recordable as well. So let's just send that into, I don't know. Actually, no, you can turn off. So like if you don't want the bender to apply pitch bend to a channel, you just want to use like this raw CV output from it, you can turn it off. So you can see that movement of the bender is going to play back now. You can also just kind of override the sequence as you feel, and it'll just pick up where it left off. I think that's all I'll cover right now because I don't want to spend too much time. There's some more little tidbits in here that I didn't go over, but I think this covers most of it. Anyways, thanks for watching. Hopefully I'll see most of you in person at a Frequency Freaks event soon. Alright, take care.
Does it for our Eurorack demos. We finally have a very special and exclusive demo here for you today from Kodek, who is the sort of the performative genius behind Erica Synths. Anytime Girts or his team build a new modular device, Kodek is always the one that turns it into a something musical, I think. You know, I have seen Girts do performances as well on different things, and he can certainly tear the roof off when he wants to. But I love seeing what Kodek does with the Erica gear. So let's check out his demo of Perkons. Great. Well, that does it for our demos. So let's open it up to the wider world here. I think Anna or Tulpa just went off to get some food. Like we all need to fuel up sometimes, but she'll be back soon. But let's just talk a little bit about your demos. First of all, we've gone through all of our product demonstrations now, and so let's just have a little bit of a chat. I know at the time that we're filming this, some people on the panel haven't fully completed the demos. Also, Kodek and Bachelard aren't here on the panel with us, but here, David. Can you tell us a little bit about your Precision Disruptor and what you sort of intend to show with your demo?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, thank you so much for having us here. Anti-Kulture, we're a brand new company. There's so many seasoned people on this panel, so I feel really humbled by all the awesome work and all the awesome creative things that have come out of all the brains that I'm looking at right now. So I feel very honored. And I would say first and foremost for us coming up with this concept was more because we just were so inspired about Eurorack in general, all the tools that were coming out and all the great creative options that there are, that just kind of sparked an idea for us to have this kind of different concept and a little bit of a different taste on a sequencer that we thought was really useful. It's obviously a tough world to be in because there's so much creativity in the Eurorack space, and there's so many amazing things coming out all the time, that it's tough, I think, to have really unique ideas in general. And this being our first module, we already feel the pressure of how to surmount, sustaining a Eurorack company like some of you guys are doing so well, so it's really mind-blowing to see that people can do it the way that you guys have done that. So but for us, really the main concept is, our Eurorack sequencer is it's a random based generative sequencer. It's supposed to be really straightforward, really simple, and really fast. It's not the type of sequencer that's gonna run your whole system, or it's gonna have too much depth. It's really supposed to be a kind of plug and play type of environment. And as you guys have seen from the demo at this point, essentially it's really meant to allow you to choose some parameters, and like what notes you're going to be including in your sequence, octave ranges, the frequency of gates, accents, and slides. And then from there, it'll just start generating different melodic content and rhythmic content for you. And obviously, there's already some stuff on the market, like the Melodizer is a great kind of that similar type of concept. And, obviously you can use Turing machines and other ways of generating random content that can be run through quantizers so that you can control. But then what ours allows us to do also at the top of the sequencer, there's the actual gates and the actual step sequencer at the top that then allows you to go back and fine tune each per step, whether you want, to change the note, the octave range, the gates, so forth. So for us, it was kind of a way that we saw that there was a space to be able to use randomization in a smart way that's kind of controlled, but at the same time also allow you to fine tune what comes out on the other side. So maybe you randomize something, but you realize that it's quite almost there, but you'd like to make a few small adjustments. So that's kind of the main concept. And then we have these rub buttons, which are kind of two different buttons that allow you to cycle through the melodic and the rhythmic content of what gets generated. So what that allows you to do is kind of pick a general concept of which direction you want to go as far as the melodic content and the busyness of the structure of the sequence. And then using these two buttons, you can start shuffling around everything really quickly and coming up with different ideas really fast. I guess really the main way that we had the concept to begin with was supposed to be kind of more of like a 303 style sequencer, that's heavy uses on accents and slides as well. And it was really kind of a concept because I found, when I'm sitting there programming, like a 303, or really, I guess, any sequence, you take time and you work on stuff and you figure something out and you're like, oh, you know what, this sounds good. you spend maybe a little bit of time with it and you stop and you're like, okay, is this the best, most amazing thing it could ever be? And for me, at least, a lot of time the answer is no, it could be better. So you keep working at it. And then maybe we spent a good amount of time just really kind of pushing your creative flow, trying to get this one idea into shape. And what this does is kind of a different approach, which instead of doing that, you kind of start with some decision making, choosing what type of notes you want, what kind of scale you want, the busyness. And then from there, you can really cycle through a bunch of ideas that are staying within that same thought process. So what that allows you to do is to try a bunch of different ideas quickly, as opposed to kind of just do it the other way, which would be to like really invest in one idea and really mold it, and I guess because I don't want to take up too much time here, but the last thing I would say is, for me, not being an instrumentalist, and I think about a lot of the people that make the less melodic content, when I think about music in general, and outside of even electronic music or Eurorack or anything like that, I find that a lot of the best melodic content that I hear, at least, are usually people that are instrumentalists, where their dexterity and their playing, whether they're a piano player or a guitar player, they have the freedom to be able to play and without thinking, it's second nature. So their muscle memory is so quick that what that allows them to do, instead of spending the time to try to figure out how to move their fingers, they can think about, oh, let's listen to everything and really just concentrate on what content is coming out and focus on that being the main part of my creative flow. And, I feel like not being an instrumentalist and not having that strength to be able to do that way, this was kind of our approach to be able to take the time and effort of the pressing and thinking too hard, and more on quickly being able to generate ideas that still make sense, that still can be fine-tuned, but then you can go through a lot of them quickly to really find something that you love and care about.
Yeah, well, and I love the fact that you have, you can randomize not only different parameters, but also at different sort of levels of magnification. So it's like you can randomize accents, slides, note values. I think you've got 4 main lanes of randomization, right?
Yeah, there's actually 5. Yeah, there's the gate, the accents, and the slides. So essentially we have the 5 sliders at the bottom, and what they do from 0 to 100 is they'll just populate randomly from 0 to 100, meaning fully filling up the whole sequence with gates or accents or slides. And then the other 2, which the last 2, are the note and octave variation, which essentially you can select a root note and a root octave, and as you slide the slider up, it will start including the extra notes that you've decided to include. So you kind of have this ability, and it's cool because being in real time, using the sliders like that you see it kind of populate really quickly is just kind of a different, neat, and kind of creative way to do it. And for us, it's really fun, and it's, even though it's started off as something that was supposed to be based on kind of like a 303 type sequencer, obviously, as everyone knows in Eurorack, the freedom of the ecosystem of Eurorack, where you can really just like use anything for anything, because you're sharing, within certain boundaries, I guess. But generally speaking, you open yourself up to really use it in all sorts of different, really creative ways, So that's something that's really been helpful for me as well, and really wonderful to see.
Yeah, well, it's cool that you have you have those 2 buttons as well. I think one called groove and one maybe called notes, or
the melody. Yeah, the
melody. Yeah, so it's like if I like what's coming out melodically, but I don't really know what to do with the groove, but I don't like it, so let's change it. So you just pop the groove button, and something new comes out. And it's great for beginners as well, because that controlled random, you feel like a contributor to it, but at the same time, you don't have to reinvent the wheel to make great music,
Yeah, that's a great concept to do. And it's also something that I internally, maybe I battle a little bit with also, is like, when you start building music technology that kind of lets people cut corners, is always something that in my mind has been something to think about, because you don't want people to not take the time to learn what they're doing when they're creating music. But at the same time, I think there's also a big strength, if you do know what you're doing, is to be able to have a tool like this. So it's a fine line, and those disrupt buttons that you're mentioning are really kind of the core of the whole sequencer, because what it allows you to do is, once you kind of come up with a concept that you like, by pressing them, you're just essentially creating new patterns, new melodies, and new grooves that are sitting within the same parameters that you have already chosen that you like. And now it's just shuffling melody and grooves around, gates and melodic content around. So you get to listen to a lot of different variations, let's say, of the same kind of concept and idea.
Yeah, well, something I really love about all of the hardware that and software that we're showing today is that there's different features available for different like levels of knowledge in the instrument. So if you're a complete beginner with your device, you can hit that melody or groove button. With Perkons, you can easily, I mean, it's one of the most immediate sequencers I've ever seen, but with Perkons, you can quickly and easily create patterns right away without an advanced knowledge. With Vector Sequencer, similar idea. There's just, it's got something for everybody. And the more you choose to learn and the deeper you go into it, the more features become available to you. It's sort of like this lotus, if I can, connect what I'm wearing to our discussion a little bit. Sort of like this lotus flower that keeps blossoming, right? Just keeps blooming and new features and new things unfold. So, but speaking a little bit about the Vector Sequencer, Jim and Trovarsi, I'd love to hear, I think maybe Jim at first, what was the germ of the idea that led you to release this in 2018?
Let's see, going back a bit, I'd done Numerology, which was a desktop sequencer for Mac OS, and that had been going on for quite a while. And I started to see, I already had some Eurorack gear from many, many years ago and used it some and then kind of set it aside for a while. And then I started to see the market growing and some new sequencers coming out and going, yeah, that one's interesting, but I do a different way, and then I got very lucky, and a friend of mine introduced me to a hardware engineer who was eager to collaborate on something. So I started working on some designs, and moving from desktop programming to embedded programming involves some new skills. So it took a while to acquire those. And I had done a grid-based sequencer mapping for Numerology. You can plug a launchpad into the computer and do a fair bit of the editing on the launchpad. So, but I didn't want to do that for a hardware sequencer, at least not at first. So I went with, displays and encoders design. And originally it was going to be a two-row 80-character LCD display. And then I found these wonderful large OLED displays, and it's like, oh, it's got to be that. So a lot of it became designed around, okay, what fits in the Eurorack space, where I can have these displays and the 8 main encoders, an extra 9th encoder, various buttons and inputs and outputs. And it went through quite a few iterations. I think the first working sequencer we had, which was actually just a bunch of PCBs connected together through some breadboards, was about 1.5 years before the first public release. And then went through a few more iterations, showed it at NAMM. I think that would have been 2017, and then did a big revision. So it's, in terms of design style, the idea was to take some of the main concepts from Numerology and put it in a hardware box and see how we could, you just don't have the resources in hardware that most hardware platforms that you do on a desktop platform. So a lot of it was just to rejigger how things work and see how much we can fit in, and make sure the UI was designed so that it's fairly easy to get started. And then if you want to dive in and access some of the more advanced features, that we make that as easy as possible.
Trovarsi, in terms of the sequencing technique that you were looking to demonstrate to us today, can you talk a little bit more about that? I mean, we saw your demo. What do you sort of hope to achieve in that demo?
Well, first, I really enjoy using the vector sequencer because of the visual aspect. I can see, my notes. I can use the actual sequencer itself to create a new sequence. But one of the things that I really also focus on when I use this sequencer is the connectivity. So when I have it connected to the force, the Akai force, it's clocking the Akai force is clocking the vector sequencer, So it's able to receive, or excuse me, syncing is essentially what I'm doing, is I'm syncing the two devices together. But it has the capability to either be the leader or the follower, which is great. And then in addition to the fact that it has the connectivity of sending MIDI over USB as well as 5-pin DIN, I was like, why not take this one step further? And one of the things that I like to do is do drum fills and just kind of do weird wonky modulation with percussion. So I am using the Euclidean circles sequencer, but I'm sending the clock, let's see, I have to think about what I was doing in there. Okay, so I am sending the sequence from the vector from one of the tracks or tracks, essentially. And instead of sending the pitch, I'm just using the gate to step the Euclidean sequencer. So, first, that's the first part of it. So as long as the gate is being sent out, that trigger out, it's stepping the clock on the Euclideans. But where it gets interesting is that the vector also has an input from the modulation. So each track or part has modulation lanes, and you can do them internally or externally. So I'm then sending CV into one of the modulation lanes on that same part that's moving the Euclidean circles clock. And now I'm able to attenuate and move that CV. So it's then controlling how fast, or the probability in some instances, or how quickly or how slow, or if it's ratcheting, for example, I'm using that modulation to control and send out to that other sequencer through the vector. So that's where I can get some really wonky like extra percussion happening. So I'll use the kick to kind of to anchor the sequence and move, and to anchor the pattern. But then by using the modulation and the clock, it's then like pushing and pulling the percussion. So in one of the demos, you'll see where I used it to ratchet and to control how much ratcheting is occurring, as well as then in another sequence I showed probability, and depending on where I am moving that CV, the vector is then changing the probability of how it's moving along the rhythm. So yeah.
Very cool.
But
yeah, well, and so that's fantastic. I mean, the vector and the precision disruptor are really nice, very similar HP and size. I think they're both 42 HP maybe, or 40 or 42, somewhere around there.
Yeah, 42 for the vector.
Yeah, we're 40.
40, yeah. And then we also have a completely different take on sequencers from the tracker style that Anna's Tulpa's put together for Nerdseq. So, Tulpa, the Nerdseq and you, how far back do you two go? Where did that relationship begin? And yeah, what do you like about it? And what do you want to achieve with the demo?
Actually, it's kind of almost, I could say that it's a recent tool that I've been using, I think about 6 months. My cat is really... She also wants to say something. Wait a moment, come here. Oh, anyway, so yes, it's a pretty much recent tool in my whole setup, because I always go from that perspective of a live performer and mobility, which is super important for me in terms of carrying the gear together and traveling on long distances. And one of my next goals was actually to shrink it even more, trying to maybe I will try to build up like this palette type of system, like very, very tiny one, and use a lot of 1U modules just out of experiment. So switching to the Nerd sequencer was, of course, sort of like artistic necessity to a certain degree, because I'm always thinking strategically in terms of my performances. And since I'm also performing at times with other musicians to whom the style music, like for instance with Gavin Eisenhower, where he would be layering out drums in real time in more of a jazz, trip hop, drum and bass style of music. So when I collaborate in that kind of concept, I need to prepare certain sceneries, which I would rather be also seeing a little bit sort of predicted, but still keeping a space for improvisation. And so in my case, it was a necessity in a way to actually switch to a very like complex type of a tool, multi-layer type of a tool, which could satisfy all those perspectives. Like I can just trigger certain sounds because I'm using Nerdsequencer in conjunction with a simulator from Rossum, which is like highly deep sampler. So I'm triggering voices with a simulator, or as well, Nerdsequencer can allow me to build up like classic type of sequences if I wanted to. So that gives me this even wider flexibility where I can say, okay, like if I'm invited to perform a minimal techno session, then I would prepare that type of a patch. I'm gonna show it in the video that I will that I'm preparing for this streaming. And then again, if I'm like keen to create something more classical, then I can also sort of prepare a sequence, prepare a melody. I don't use quantizers, but there is option even for that if I needed to. Or even I could build up entire compositions inside the Nerdsequencer. However, I'm avoiding that because I want to keep more space like for the actual real-time composing, because I'm also using effects in my setup and looping and phrasing, and I'm reacting in the moment of time on what's going on. And DFAM is like completely improvisational tool. So I'm kind of like preparing sceneries in the Nerdsequencer as well. What was also attractive point to me that there was 2 audio outputs in the Nerdsequencer itself. So besides the actual triggering points, gates and control voltages which I could predetermine in the Nerdsequencer, I could also use 2 audio outputs and build up sort of sceneries in there as well. So that was also a very attractive point to me. And I'm not using yet the Nerdsequencer in full power as what it can do, because it's a very complex and deep tool. And I actually invited Thomas Margolf, the creator of Nerdsequencer, to give a workshop at Modular Moon on the 2nd April. We already booked the location. It's the same place where Girts were giving us a lesson on synthesis methods last time.
Cool.
So I would like to invite people through that stream as well, because I will stream it through my Instagram page, and so it's going to be a deep dive into Nerdsequencer from the creator himself, and so he's going to show more that I can, because he probably also is as a creator, he probably knows all the tricks and tips and hidden messages, things like this. Like in my situation, I am, always with my students, I'm always first thing I'm analyzing is the style of music and the end result that an artist want to achieve. And from that perspective, I'm already analyzing what kind of tools will be required in order to achieve this specific audio idea, this specific audio content. And the next question I usually ask is how long this content is going to be played. Is it 15 minutes? Is it 1 hour session? Is it 4 hour session? Because that is also determining the workflow and the actual tools that you need to choose in your setup. Like, although it is also sort of like a liquid question in a way, because like I was having long sessions just by having Moog Mother 32 and a DFAM and a hi-hat and one simple sampler from Bastille Instruments, like back in the days. So it's kind of like also depends how familiar you are with your setup, how integrated you are into your setup, because it's manual work, you know. It's also motorics, also how well you hear yourself during the performance. So many aspects are influencing how calm you are, whether you wanted to have this performance very prepared and you like carrying a message that you want to say, and it's very important for you to bring this whole performance to a certain point. You know, there's artists who are like replicating their performances from one to another, and so it's like also great achievement. In my case, I wanted to have like this kind of scenery, so naturally I had to get a tool that is going beyond just triggering certain voices, which what I had like when I was using, for instance, Tip Top Audio, circadian rhythms, just by, and like also the workflow with that is very like user friendly. You just turn on and off a knob during the performance, you know, adding steps, removing steps. So it's like all these factors matter, because performance, by the whole act of performing, is already a very challenging thing, you know. So of course, naturally, it was like a moment to come to and to realize, okay, now it's time for me to switch to Nerd Sequencer. Although 3 years ago I would have been saying like, no, it's like, it's way too much of a menu diving for me, you know. Like I would have been like, no, I would rather have like a 4-step sequencer, very easy one, and change pitch per step in real time, maybe feed it some control voltage for randomization steps or whatsoever. 3 years later, I'm already like more into like building up this balance between, okay, I'm preparing scenery and also the sampler choice, of simulator sampler choice. If before I would be using like a simple sampler from Tip Top Audio or like Pastel, Grandpa, granular sampler, now I have 8 outputs, 8 voices I can trigger simultaneously from one from one sampler, having each of them individually and also having the whole package as a stereo output. So that multiplies the whole patching infinitely.
Yeah, I mean, I think an interesting thing about, there's like a couple different axes of choice, like with choosing a sequencer. One is the amount of preparation you want to do for your set, and how your sequencer sort of complements the amount of preparation you want to do. Like if you want to be if you want it to be improvisational, then there are sequencers like the Roland stuff, or things that generate more random voltages, like David's unit, the Precision Disruptor. You know, or if you want to build whole sets and songs and have each performance basically be similar from one to the next, then you need to consider something like a tracker or an Ableton style thing, where you can encode so much of that complexity and basically remove the randomness, remove a lot of the unknowns. So it's this axis of improvisation versus through composition, and then also of complexity or simplicity. And basically, I like to think a lot about like, the more flexible you want to be with a unit, the more complexity you have to endure or accept, basically. And the deeper you want it, the more flexible you want something to be, the deeper you want to go with it, the more time you have to spend learning it and treating it like an instrument. But in terms of like striking this balance between immediacy and complexity, I really love Girts' new drum sequencer, the Perkons, because actually, Anna, you mentioned briefly the DFAM, and the DFAM is cool because it was the first drum sequencer that I saw that basically or drum synthesizer, as a single voice, that I saw people making a whole range of sounds out of a single voice just because they were good at synthesis. And I think Perkons takes this to one level higher, because you have 4 voices, which some people might think out of a drum synthesizer, a drum sequencer, that might be used to like Roland TR, 16 voice or 12 voice classic drum synthesizers. Maybe 4 they're thinking is not enough, except when you see this demo or any demo with Perkons, you can see just this huge variety of sounds you can get. I mean, those voices can be umpteen number of things, right? So Girts, I mean, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about, I guess, the inspiration behind Perkons. Your company is now so experienced in making sequencers and drum units. I guess, what led you to build this particular one? What did the previous units maybe not address such that you felt that this was needed?
See, first of all, we have to distinguish trigger sequencers and CV sequencers, or complex sequencers that generate both triggers and control voltages. We have a choice of every kind of sequencer, you know. But the main objective when we developed any of our units is the idea that inspiration, it's a very fragile thing. You know, you want to have this immediacy for your when you interact with an instrument. Meaning, if you are creating drum track, then you want to have immediate feedback from the machine. Is it like Perkons' desktop machine? But same goes with the Eurorack modules as well. Or when you are creating a melodic track, you also want to have immediate feedback from a synthesizer, and you want to tweak those parameters straight away in order not this inspiration to fade away. And this is what I like about David's new sequencer, that really treats your inspiration in the right way. That what you do, you straight away get a feedback, you know. And you know, when you take a look on Perkons, it's integrated machine already, you know, because you know, you see there are other sequencers that are kind of similar to one on the Perkons, because it just takes all 4 drum tracks and lays it out on a surface of sequencer, and you can control all tracks simultaneously. I guess the first who made that complex sequencer were Polyphony guys with their 8x16 or 32 track sequencer, and then Korg recently also released their desktop sequencer with 4x16 tracks. But
the new SQ one, I think.
Yes, exactly. But when it is integrated in the instrument, and you can control simultaneously several parameters on each step, so which is not really possible with say Korg sequencer, because you basically set triggers and some CVs as well. But here you can straight away design a drum track on all 4 voices, and then by holding these buttons, step buttons, you can adjust several parameters, and the instrument recalls it. So this immediate interaction between making a sequence and how sound is generated straight away does not allow this inspiration to fade away, because you have immediate feedback, and you can save it also just by pushing a button. You know, you do not need to do menu diving to yes, this is what I want, and then you just start menu diving just to save it, and it again fades away maybe, and maybe you figure out, no, the thing I saved actually is not there, it's almost there, so I want to do some adjustments as well, then I have to go out of the demo and start it from scratch. So, and basically, yeah, the most immediate sequencer is a sequencer like these, like which you found on classical Moog synthesizer. This is a Moon Modular one. It's like 4 tracks, and you can assign a first track for CVs, second track, for instance, for accents, and a third one for filter modulations, and this one could be for like another baseline running. And yes, this really has immediate feedback, and your inspiration is reflected directly to the sound you make. But it has a major drawback because you cannot save all those settings, and then there is a next step on sequencer development, how you make those presets saved, and how you make them saved in a reasonable and easy way. So that's all art about sequencers.
Yeah. And there's an element of kind of empathy as well. I think anytime you're building something, you have to try to consider the thoughts and feelings of the user and of a variety of different types of users, and which are your main. I guess some businesses talk about like an avatar, where they have like this vision of this hypothetical kind of ideal user that they have, that maybe this person is, or it's a group of people. Maybe it's you have an avatar that's like 35 years old, that's female, that's in a certain type of job, and you design products around these avatars, kind of thing. And so, have you ever done that with any of your units? Like,
not really, but I feel really, I would say, see, nowadays, every second day there is a new Eurorack module announced, even maybe every single day. And imagine this, what suffering has to go through a Eurorack user who just swaps time by time modules in his or her rack, and then he has to learn all patching techniques, all controls of every single unit from scratch. And sometimes it may happen that you have your performance system ready, but then you do not rehearse it for months, let's say, by some reason, like you go to vacation or something, and then you come back and all of a sudden you have forgotten all menus, what's present there, and so on, and you have to learn from scratch. And this is again a part where your inspiration may fade away. So yeah, this immediacy and same time, the depth of the sequencer is what is like real challenge to do for a developer of sequencer, and to help that Eurorack user somehow to manage his system or navigate in all those possibilities, and not forget what he actually created a couple of days ago, for instance.
And make something fun enough that if they do forget, that they can come back 4 or 5 months later and still make something that sounds awesome, even though they've forgot 90% of what they knew before. There still is that kind of top level beginner friendly set of features that you have with your Perkons, that it's sort of like, yes, you can go deep, and you have, I love exactly. You have this parameter locking on every step of every part, and you also have basically automation, right? Recording knob turns and things. So this combination of parameter locking, sort of like what I consider similar to maybe DC values of like just set values per step, plus recording over top of it. It's like so killer.
Yeah. In that sense, Perkons is kind of step or trigger sequencer in combination with sequencer that actually can do much more. So yeah, that's basically a CV sequencer in a same unit.
Well, actually, I had sort of a general question for Jim and Girts and David as well. Just curious to know if you had looked at other products or had come to know and love other sequencers, and if there were elements from those that influenced you in your final products, and sort of how they might have made an appearance. We liked this feature from X or Y, but it always had this, so we wanted to translate it this way, and we remade it in our own vision. So maybe just to start with you, Jim, what was there anything that you came to either numerology or the five that?
Well, I mean, it goes way back because a lot of what's in the vector comes from numerology. But before I started working on numerology, I'd used Reactor, and I loved the way that Reactor allowed you to create sequencers to modulate other sequencers. So that was kind of the hook that kind of set a baseline for what I wanted personally, and also excluded a lot of things, right? Because at that time, I had a Korg Z1, I had a Roland MC303, and the Korg has a fantastic arpeggiator in it. It's a programmable arpeggiator where you can hold a chord and it'll basically play a sequence melody based on the notes from that chord. And the Roland, of course, at least for when you're within a part, has the really fast drum programming approach to it. But for me personally, I just have this thing about wanting to have little changes coming in from modulation or sequencing or randomization, and to be able to control that relatively specifically in how it affects the sequence. That's just important for me compositionally. But I pulled some things working with Reactor. I also worked with Max for quite a while, even before MSP was available, and that's all long before it became Max for Live, of course. So those are a lot of the early things it set was internal modulation, a mix of directed composition and algorithmic or modulated or different approaches to writing music, basically, that were really interesting to me. And then moving into hardware, the basic design philosophy of having the display with the encoders beneath it was something I'd been interested in pursuing for a while. And I actually consider it kind of lucky that I landed on the layout that I did, because it's turned out to hold up very well as we add more things here and there, and we find we're able to do that and not really change the mental model for the sequencer. It's still the same sequencer. It's just that there's a little extra flexibility here and there. And it's also very interesting for me working in the hardware and how that affects your design decisions when going back into software. Because the nice thing about hardware is that this button is always here. You don't have to reveal it from a menu or something, right? And you learn things about physical memory and the physical activity of using a piece of hardware that become really valuable, just in terms of how you're extending the hardware, how you're designing new hardware, or also how you'd work in updating software. So lots of little things I pull from things, but they're very specific little ideas. And a lot of it is what technology is available. The microcontrollers that started to become available a few years back are, they're not as fast as what's in the iPhone, but they're quite capable. And displays in particular, there's a lot more opportunity or options now than there was, say, 10 or 15 years ago. So there's a big impact on what's available. You go back far enough, and surface mount technology was simply not available to small manufacturers. You had to have serious budget to do things like that. And now, I can load up a credit card and order new circuit boards for something, right? So bits and pieces from lots of different areas then.
How about you, David? Any inspirations in your design?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I think that for me, I'm actually the type of person that makes music always. I found out quite a while back actually that the most important parts. Oh, sorry, door's opening. The most important parts about music for me, or the best way that I got to music really for myself and my personal journey, was more through exploration and really like laying into the tools, you know, and kind of letting tools guide me. So I've always been a big fan of sequencers in general. You know, I look at sequencers as kind of like, if you have the traditional musician, you have like the muscle memory, dexterity in the brain, and then you have the instrument, you know, and the sequencer is like the human part, you know, that's like really fast and can come up with the ideas. And so for me, that's always been an unbelievably important tool. And absolutely, I mean, I've taken inspiration from so many different things, you know, that are on the market right now. You know, I've played with a lot of different sequencers, thankfully. Maybe some of the bigger ones, I guess, starting off back, you know, was starting with Electron, you know, which was kind of some of my first pieces of gear back in the day. I also use, you know, I love being in the box as well too. The MLK 185, which is a Max for Live, you know, sequencer, and that kind of has the same concept because it has this ability to randomize really quickly, but then you can throw like a scale, like a MIDI scale kind of in there, so that allows you to restrain kind of like, you know, what the randomization is doing. And it's really fast and really quick, and you can just kind of cycle through ideas. So that was a big inspiration for me. There's also some other plugins too that I love as well, like the Audio Realism, the ALB, which is like a 303 style sequencer that has a cool little like randomization thing inside of there, which also was very inspiring. And then moving into obviously the Eurorack space, you know, I have quite a bit of the Erica Synths stuff that I really love and use a lot. And yeah, so I guess overall in general, I would say that if there wasn't this inspiration from these other instruments, I would have never even, you know, been able to be part of music, I don't think. So I absolutely, you know, owe everything to everybody and a lot of you guys, you know, especially for all the things that you guys have created. So 100%.
How about you, Girts? Obviously, you've been inspired by many things.
See, mostly, you know, these are classical instruments or classical electronic instruments with their, and I find the beauty in simplicity of those. Like take TR-909, for instance, which was an inspiration for our drum sequencer, for instance, which afterwards turned into Perkons sequencer. When but yeah, this TR-909, it has this drawback of selecting tracks, you know, like typical sequencers, and our drum sequencer goes the same, that you have to select track and then you just hit in triggers, you know. And then you select next track, and then you maybe want to change the previous one. And, you know, this switching through tracks, it's a bit annoying because it takes time. It does not give you this visual feedback on where you are, you know, and what kind of track you are working on. So therefore, on Perkons, we bring that to next level and laid it out so that all tracks are available simultaneously. And we purposely ditched a display, which is, for instance, on 909, it shows some BPM thing or what track you are in. So we purposely ditched that as well on Perkons. And if you want to see the BPM, you just hold Shift button and rotate tempo knob, and rows of LEDs on step buttons show what BPM actually is at that moment, for instance. And on our CV sequencers, obviously, again, we took all good things from Moog sequencer and put it into Black sequencer, where you again have all parameters immediately available, and these small buttons, they choose what kind of parameter you adjust. So is it CD, is it gate, ratchets, shuffle, modulation, and so basically we squeezed all goodness of classical, let's call it Moog sequencer into Eurorack unit, but keeping this immediacy of interaction, and that's where our inspiration came from. So we wanted to have this feel of classical instrument, but features of contemporary requirements of Eurorack or of modern electronic music producers.
Well, I love the fact that so many of your sequencers take into account chaining patterns, but also backing them up into presets, and usually some kind of backup method onto a computer, like through EEPROM or something like that with a drum sequencer. So this idea of, you're building something immediate, something that is very much inspired by the classic machines from the past, but also with kind of an attention and respect to people that might want to compose with your sequencer. And if they want to compose, then they're going to have to be able to build longer form.
Exactly.
Longer forms, right? And back them up somehow.
Yeah.
I love the black sequencer, by the way. It's a great sequencer. It really is.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But the randomization is partly controlled, so you can randomize, but you cannot really control what you're.
No, but it's really strong. You're right. It really is quick and fast, but also very deep at the same time. You know, you kind of have both of those options to be able to be fast with it, but also if you want to dive in, you know, it's definitely a sequencer I use a lot.
And a question for you, Trovarsi. You know, for me, certainly, I struggle as I guess most people do in sequencer land with, you know, left brain, right brain, if you like, planning it out versus just experimenting with it and improvising with it. Is there any particular, you know, sequencing platform that you think does a nice job of balancing those, or brings a unique perspective on it that you feel is noteworthy?
Like platform meaning like which sequencers I've used?
Software, hardware. Is there a certain sequencer or feature set within any given sequencer that you think does a nice job of kind of balancing that?
Well, I mean, right now, my predominantly the sequencer that I've been using in terms of hardware has been the Vector. However, I've used the drum sequencer by Erica Synths. I've had the opportunity to dive in a little bit into David's sequencer, and they all have these special, unique things that you can use, and depending on what your goal is, what my goal is, and for that particular patch, like one may have something that the other does not. Like I've used Girts, the drum sequencer, the accents and the triggers, and the fact that you can have the banks and presets. It's great. I have used David's sequencer to sequence my Pulsar 23 and the bass line on it, and it's great, so I can get the slides going. And then with Jim's, I tend to love the fact that it has the connectivity and visual. I'm a very visual person as well, so I really enjoy being able to see the notes in my sequence and the connectivity, because where the Vector has kind of been this main sequencer for me lately is because not only visually, but the connectivity. And that, to me, being somebody who builds a lot of hybrid setups and somebody who is, basically I've embraced the fact that I am constantly changing my setup, and I'm okay with that, and with that being able to introduce MIDI and the computer and having the opportunity to use other sequencers and going into Ableton. I think it really depends. And I also teach people, and one of the things, like, I never tell anybody what sequencer to buy or what module to buy. I always say, ask yourself, like, how you think, like how your brain works, and then and what goal you want to accomplish, and then go with that. Like, I have students that use the Deluge, I have students that use the Erica Synths Black sequencer, and I have students that only use clock dividers and clock, they don't use a sequencer at all. They just use a quantizer, clocks, and dividers, and that's how their brain works. So I think it just really depends on the goal, but all these different sequencers, I have not yet tried the Nerdseq, but I have been very intrigued by it. I've had the opportunity to use Tracker a little bit, and I like the fact that you can just constantly randomize. It's almost like a video game to me when I was using these other trackers. So like I've used the Polyan tracker, and it's just a matter of like randomizing, and kind of impulsively pulling sequences together, and I felt more like I was playing a video game. I'm not sure if the tracker is sort of like that, but so I don't know. I hope I answered your question.
Totally, yeah, sure. And you, Anna, what is there something, say, about the Nerdseq that you feel reminds you or is inspired by another sequencer? Obviously, the tracker model notwithstanding, but is there something within that you feel is reminiscent of something of other sequencers or other capabilities in other sequencers that you like?
Of course, Tracker is having all the features that all the other today is like sequencers. I sequence the sequencer, but the Tracker is actually a sequencer in the sequencer.
A meta sequencer.
Yeah. It's the Matryoshka doll of sequencers.
Exactly. It's today, this video, like synthesizers. So you should cut later this video with the sequencer. How many times the sequencer word was used in the whole video.
Oh, I have a counter. Yeah. And a little ping, like a little bell.
So, so that was the most attractive part for me, because I could go into all these different directions. Sometimes I just use one layer with 2 audio inputs from the Nerd sequencer only, just when I'm building up the whole 1 hour session, and then I create certain loops or melodies in there where I send further into effects and just play around with them. And then I go into the control voltage section. However, I'm not really in the terms of playability and actually improvising with the Nerd sequencer only. I think in my situation, I'm improvising more with the DFAM and with the sampler section and with the effect section, using the Nerd sequencer more like a triggering point and the optimization point for certain voices. Because your mind is also you can focus, it's a very complex devices, each of them, and also you are in a way composing in real time. You're responding to what you're hearing, and the moment can inspire you to add certain voice in the palette, or maybe pitch it down or pitch it up, or randomize some step, or or granulate a phrase, So in my case, it's this layered work in the moments of time. So I say the way the Nerd sequencer can go, and in its full capacities, its full power, I'm probably using 30% of its powers, not to mention the expansion part, that you can have extra expanding modules. So I'm not even going there. So, so it's really quite.
It's very deep.
Yes.
I was going to ask you if you've tried the Sega controller at all.
No, yeah. There was this performance at the Overkill Festival. I think it was in the last session of being free again, we had a few months ago,
the last interlude.
The last not lockdown situation. So there was a guy who had two these Game Boys with the trackers inside of them, and a mixture, and that was his whole performance. So he would just play with one, create a composition, and then mix it in with the other one, play back with this. So it's like a DJing attitude to your two trackers, where you kind of play back like DJ both of them in real time, and I found it super cute. Although it was audio output, so probably this tracker had like 8 audio channels instead of like what the Nerd sequencer has. Like it's orientates to Eurorack, so of course it's more putting attention to the CV gates. Although it has also modulation output, so you can have like 6 envelopes or 6 LFOs on top of everything, or 2 of them can be having like classical. Like 2 audio outputs can be a sample output, or can be like sine wave generator, so you can use it like a synthesizer as well. So it's like depending on where you want to go. So that's pretty cool part. Relatively, the actual like what with Sega playing, like then you would be performing only with the Nerd sequencer, I think, in my mind. So, and since I'm balancing with the DFAM and the 8 sample outputs from the simulator and trying to control, it's a lot of voices already per se. So yeah, I mean,
maybe when you decide to do your vocal stuff, you can have the Sega thing in your hand, so you
that's
can.
Too much. I have to have like 20 hands.
But I must admit that there are things which like hardware sequencers cannot do technically. Like if you occasionally follow our garage channel, a friend of ours, Platon Buravicky, who is a classically trained composer. He's actually one of most hyped young composers. So he wrote a piece, Sinfonetta, for 16 well-tempered oscillators. So and he wrote a score in Sibelius software, and just output 16 channels of CV gates, which run a custom huge Eurorack system with our black oscillators and stuff. And we purposely put this score in a semi-transparent score in front, so you can actually follow how notes are played back. So Trovarsi, that's for visual representation of score. But yeah, I am, as far I'm aware, there are no Eurorack sequencers that can output 16 gates CVs and all play back those nuances.
If anyone's going to do that next, I would assume that's going to be you. So.
that's too much for this is the same discussion about polyphony in Eurorack. So I do not find polyphony in Eurorack reasonable.
Sure.
By technical limitations.
Yeah, that's why the Symphonium is such a great tool too. Yeah. I love that thing as well. But yeah, I mean, this is such a great conversation, honestly. Like, Michael, thank you so much for this, because sequencers are, for me, I'm probably my favorite parts of gear are sequencers, and it's really nice to get these different perspectives, and it's and just to see exactly like what Trovarsi was saying as well about how different each instrument is, and I think it goes beyond any sequencer as well, like hardware synthesizers. That's my favorite thing about the gear, is always finding kind of like what their strengths are, what the little things that they do really well are, and then kind of getting enchanted with them and falling in love with them, and making sure that you understand what those things are, so that when the time comes to be able to do that thing, the exact right tool that does it in the best way, and I think that's a beautiful thing about everything that's going on right here, and all these different tools that everyone's offering. It's really sweet.
Well, one thing we have here today as well is ranges of sort of experience levels in our different kind of disciplines, I guess, so we've got 3 manufacturers here that are all at different points in your journeys, I think, in terms of the the annual revenue, the size and scale of your businesses, the amount of time you've been in the industry, the number of products that you've put out, and it's really interesting to see. We've got an very well established player in Girts and Erica Synths. We've got Jim with Five12 and with the vector and numerology, and then yourself just starting out. And one question that came to mind while we were talking is, knowing, I guess I'll ask Jim this first, knowing what you know now, what advice would you have given yourself just starting out as a manufacturer years ago? And then give that to David, because I'm sure he could use it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. A lot of it just has to do with the nitty gritty of dealing with physical products. So sourcing parts, finding parts, sourcing parts, keeping track of parts, all of those things are quite the task. I'm trying to think what else. What would I tell myself? I mean, in some ways, it was actually a good idea. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I had a lot of really smart people helping me out, and I knew I was coming from a solid foundation on sequencing capabilities. So it was really a task about how can I make this usable in a hardware product. And I got lucky on a few things. Particularly finding those displays, which worked out wonderfully. And
those displays had just sort of come out, right? Or they were fairly recent on the scene in terms of their...
all of these displays were created for other products, and we're kind of getting remainder of them. And I'm not sure where these were used. I'm not even sure how long they've been out. I was initially very apprehensive because they... I was new to this, and they used little flex connectors with really high density connectors, and it made me nervous for a while. And then I got used to that. I guess my recommendation for someone getting into it is to not be afraid to experiment, and don't rush yourself in terms of saying, oh, well, it has to be this way, or I can't use this product, or ask questions, figure things out, play with things and live with them for a while. I spent, I don't know, a year or so figuring out which buttons I wanted to use. The displays, once I found those, it's like, oh, well, it has to be those. But, I got lucky finding those. So yeah, I mean, it's been a pretty crazy process, all the physical stuff is my life has changed completely since I was just writing software, because I could get on a plane with a laptop and go anywhere and do my stuff. But now I've got, employees and a warehouse of stuff and inventory to track and orders to make. And it's very interesting.
There's the full up business side that you might not have really thought about when you got into it.
Yeah. I mean, I knew that was there, but I also, when I started, like one friend of mine had suggested doing a simpler module. I'm like, no, if this is going to be a lot of work. I knew it was going to be a lot of work. I didn't know how much. And I was like, this is the one thing, if I'm only going to do one thing, this is the one thing I want. And we actually made a couple of pretty major design changes, but after the first NAMM show, we re-architected it to have the expander that initially wasn't part of the product. It was originally just like basically 2 lanes and MIDI, and and just kind of figured, we need more outputs on this. We need more MIDI. We need more CIVI, and that's where so there was a big re-architecture change to get the expander worked in. So yeah, there are lots of surprises, and there's kind of a saying around here this is what I wanted. When my dining table and my living room are covered with parts and half assembled modules, and things seem to be kind of crazy, and we're like, oh my God, we're out of these screws and we can't ship without these screws. So that kind of stuff. And you just have to kind of learn to enjoy it. It can be chaos, but it's still a lot of fun.
It's like accepting the good and the bad.
Yeah.
And just taking all of it.
Yeah.
Now, Girts, I'm like extremely anxious to hear your answer to this. What would you have told yourself just starting out, knowing what you know now? What advice would you give?
I guess I would give advice to others.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, yeah, we've got
because kind of everything came together in a right way for me. Because I started with DIY kits, and those did not require a lot of investment. So actually a company which was founded in my bedroom, literally. So there was my desk and bed behind me. So, and I was putting together orders on my bed and bringing them to post office personally. So, I could self-finance myself to develop already more modules and so. But what I can suggest is do not invest in pick and place machines, because you can easily outsource a lot of stuff. Like we developed gradually and started with like everything doing ourselves, and then because Latvia has such a great infrastructure for electronics manufacturing, from very beginning we started outsource our factory manufactured modules. So we did not have any investment in hardware for assembly, and then we outsourced logistics as well. So now we have developed very advanced system which connects warehouse to web shop to manufacturing to parts ordering system and to logistics. So as soon order comes in our web shop, it's actually shipped out within a couple of hours. And sometimes customers write us, "How can I add some other module?" No, you can't, because it's already on the way to Berlin. And we can ship our modules from Riga to LA in 3 days maximum. So customers in LA are getting our instruments in 3 days.
That's
so try to figure out ways how you outsource things which are routine, not interesting, and prevents you from inventing something new, because you just have to do this thing. So that would be a recommendation.
That's very insightful too, because I always think about us at the beginning. First module hasn't even gotten out there yet, and then I look at a company like yours that has all these amazing instruments. I'm like, man, how do you get there? That's just so much work, and even just so much creativity. Just the thought process of coming up with the concepts for all these tools.
Yeah, exactly. And we have actually team of 8 people now, and 3 or 4 of us are actually directly involved in development. So because we focus on what matters.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense a lot.
And you can maybe think that, well, it's easier, it's cheaper for a company to assembly, like have their own pick and place machine, do all assembly themselves, or hand solder things. But at the end of the day, your output of products will be actually interrupted by you doing things which can do any person, not any, but a lot of persons outside there. But only Jim can invent vector sequencer, and you can, with your experience on how music should be made, you can invent your sequencer. Because you can focus on creativity rather than on packing things,
And not trying to make every level of the process from scratch, like just sort of as like an ego thing almost. Like I saw a meme once about how there was this musician that said, I started out making tracks using presets, and then I found out that was cheating. So then I started making my own presets, and then I found out that using software sequencers was cheating. So then I bought hardware, and then I found out that using microcontrollers was cheating. So I got analog, and then he just keeps going down the line. He's like, then I made my own sequencers, and then I found out that was cheating. So then, and he goes back to and then I started making my own drums, but then using outside skins was cheating. So now I mostly just, now I farm goats because because I have to make my own skins. And he said, I haven't had a lot of time to make music these days, what with the goat farming and all. But it feels really authentic. Yeah.
That's so true. I think I saw that meme around there too.
I think I have too.
I might have butchered it, but I think I got the gist of it.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Yeah, instead of getting bogged down, on the kind of the tedious stuff, is just like focusing on the creativity is that's actually the core of our sequencer too. And what Girts was saying before about the Perkons is that same concept of like that elusive quality of being excited about what you're doing, and then not getting bogged down by a bunch of other stuff that you need to do just to make that small creative thing that you really love doing come to fruition, So
Cool. Yeah, well, thanks so much, guys. I think we better call it. There were a couple other questions that I had hoped to ask, but we're going to do more sessions, and I think we're going to do a follow-up session on the SoCal Synth Society channel. So the next thing we're looking at around late April, right, Trovarsi?
Yeah, I just dropped it in there. I'll send out an email to everyone, but I just kind of wanted to just give like a little tickler of information. And if either one of those dates right now, if anybody knows right now that they're not available that day, just let me know so we can make it work for everyone.
Scott, what's that white thing behind you on the top? On the top of your rack.
To the left.
Semi-modular, yeah.
It's a neutron.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
I don't want to say anything. It's just reskinned.
It's funny.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot, guys. I think we'll call it there for the official broadcast, but we will be back. And it's been such an honor and a pleasure to talk to all of you. Thank you so much.
Pleasure meeting you all. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me. It's great.
Yeah.
Take care.
You too. Thank you.